The topic concerning the origin of the Turkic-speaking peoples is often heavily debated and very controversial. With over 170 million native speakers, only about 40% of Turkic-speaking people actually live in Turkey, the most renowned Turkic-speaking country. The remainder of the Turks are dispersed across the Eurasian plateau, spanning as far west as Eastern Europe and as far east as northeastern Siberia, making them one of the most widely scattered people in the world. Despite their impressive spread across the Eurasian continent, it is noteworthy to mention that Turkish law has always claimed that their people descend from a small tribe of horsemen who originated in the Altai region of Central Asia, where Mongolia, Russia, Kazakhstan and China all embrace. Sandwiched between the Gobi Desert and the Siberian steppe, the Altai region represents a natural boundary between West and East Eurasia. It is thus so that understanding the demographic events that took place in this region thousands of years ago is key to understanding the origins of the Turkic people. Archaeological work conducted in the Mongolian Altai during the 21st century discovered burial sites belonging to the Pazyryk culture. Pazyryk is the name given to Iron Age nomadic tribes who inhabited the high steppes of the Altai mountains between the 5th and 3rd centuries BC. This was the first time that this culture was found in Mongolia. This equestrian-loving culture is known for holding frozen bodies of warriors buried with their horses and their weapons. Pazyryk cultural sites were traditionally found west of the Altai. The discovery of the kurgans within Mongolia, however, indicates that these Iron Age people had begun their migration into East Asia. The Scythians, whose history is well known from the ancient texts of Herodotus, was the name the Greeks gave to a number of separate Indo-Iranian speaking nomadic tribes living in the region encompassing the Pontic Caspian steppe and the steppes of Central Asia. The Pazyryk belonged to the eastern branch of the Scythians, known by the Persians as the Sarkar. In the 7th to 2nd century BC, Scythian culture was flourishing in the steppes and started to expand eastwards until they reached the Altai mountains. Advances in technology that favoured mountain nomadic pastoralism were the triggers for the expansion of the Scythian culture across the western Eurasian steppe. Archaeological findings, almost entirely provided by burial site discoveries, documented that the Scythians had European morphological features. Recently, however, several works focusing on ancient mitochondrial DNA of Eastern Scythian burials revealed that this population had a mixed composition of West and East Eurasian lineages. The genetic study, conducted by a team from the Autonomous University of Barcelona, proposes two hypotheses for the origin of the genetic diversity and admixture amongst the Iron Age inhabitants of the Altai. The first of these postulations is that the people holding West Eurasian lineages were in fact the Scythians, and they arrived in the Altai mountains with their eastward migrations. Once settled, they began to establish relations with the neighbouring communities from East Asia holding exclusively East Eurasian lineages. The second hypothesis proposes that the admixture was the result of the interaction of the native people inhabiting both Eastern and Western Altai. It suggests that the people in West Altai already had West Eurasian lineages, whilst those in the East had East Eurasian lineages. Their interaction, though, was inevitably the result of the cultural transmission that the Scythians brought with them as they migrated eastwards. The majority of the retrieved sequences of the Iron Age Altaians fit into East Eurasian lineages, namely to haplogroups A, C, D and G. On the other hand, about 42% of the individuals belong to West Eurasian mitochondrial haplogroups, namely J, K, H, V, U and T. However, when Bronze Age samples from the Mongolian Altai mountains are analysed, 100% of the mitochondrial lineages belong to East Eurasian haplogroups, an opposite profile to that detected in the western side of the Altai mountains. Since the number of West Eurasian lineages in the Altai does not seem to increase over the duration of the Iron Age, the results suggest that the Altai represented a boundary to gene flow up until the beginning of the Iron Age, and that the introduction of new technology introduced by the Scythians is what led to the admixture of the pre-existing lineages, supporting the second hypothesis. By the 3rd century BC, Turkic-speaking peoples from the Altai region began migrating westwards, replacing the Indo-European languages in Central Asia. However, contrary to popular belief, the origin of this genetic admixture was prior to the westward migrations, and may be traced back to the Iron Age in Central Asia, or even earlier in South Siberia.